Hello and welcome. Let me ask you a question. When you picture a serial killer, what do you see in your mind? I'm assuming you probably picture a man, or a stranger in a van, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, a predator, someone who hunted. Same. That's probably what I would picture too. What you probably don't picture is a grandmother, a Sunday school teacher who also poisoned people for almost over a decade. This is a woman who's pretty unremarkable, who many would probably describe as invisible. So when bodies kept piling around her, nobody so much as suspected her name. What was her name, you're asking? Her name was Velma Barfield. And that is who we're talking about today. If you're new here, I'm Ray, and this is another dark story. On this show, we like to look at cases that no one else might want to look at. We look at how the headlines mythologized the cases, how the systems failed them, and who paid the cost. So today we're talking about Velma Barfield, little-known serial killer. So a little bit about her. She killed at least 4 people. She was the first woman in the United States executed in 22 years, and most people have never heard her name. So today I'm going to walk you through exactly who she was, what made her, and the question every case eventually forces you to answer. Was she a monster, or was she something else? Before we begin, I want to remind you that, as the name implies, I tell a lot of dark stories on this podcast, and I don't like to censor information in an effort to not sanitize cases. This story does cover sensitive topics, including abuse, addiction, and murder, so viewer discretion is advised. However, if you like what we do here, the deeper dives and the cases that no one else likes to touch, the best way to support this show for free is to hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening, because it tells the algorithm to put these episodes in front of more people who'd actually want to listen to them. And that's it. That is my whole pitch. So sit back, relax, and let's get into the story of Velma Barfield. Chapter 1. Who was she? Our story starts in 1932, and Margie Velma Bullard was born in rural South Carolina. The family moves to Fayetteville, North Carolina, and she was the second of 9 kids on a tobacco farm. Velma's father was reportedly physically abusive. According to some sources, Velma later disclosed that he sexually abused her throughout her adolescence. And apparently, her mother knew and never intervened. Now, I want you to put a pin in that and remember that detail, because this plants a seed for the rest of her life, and it sets a pattern of nobody seeming to step in when she needs help. So, moving on. Another thing about Velma's childhood is that she said she remembered her father beating her once for stealing. And it was the only thing he ever did consistently as a parent. So this seems to be a child who learned early that visibility and being seen is dangerous, and invisibility is safety. And let's hold on to that because it explains a lot of what happens later. So let's fast forward. It's now 1949, and Velma is 17. And Velma marries her high school boyfriend. His name is Thomas Burke. Now, this was a standard escape route for a working-class Southern girl, where you basically get out of one man's house by moving into another's. That was how it worked back then. They had 2 kids really fast. And by Velma's own account, their early marriage was actually okay. They were happy for a while. Then something happens to Velma that sets her life on a trajectory she couldn't have anticipated. So Velma is hit with a slew of medical problems. First, she gets a hysterectomy. Then she gets chronic back pain. Now here's the detail that makes this entire case. So Velma is in chronic pain as a result of these health issues from her hysterectomy and her chronic back pain. Now, this was far before we were inundated with wellness and physical therapy, so the standard practice back then was to medicate everything. In this era, in the 1960s and 70s, doctors treated women's pain by sedating them, especially Southern white women, especially mothers, and Velma was prescribed pretty much everything and the kitchen sink. Let's take a look at what she got. So, according to a journalist who has done one of the most comprehensive accounts of her case, Velma got prescriptions from more than 24 doctors, including Valium, Librium, barbiturates, narcotics, sleeping pills, stimulants, antidepressants, all prescribed, all addictive, all combined in doses that probably would have killed most people. And Velma, like so many other people who have chronic pain issues or are prescribed prescriptions irresponsibly, got addicted. There's definitely a larger conversation to be had on this subject, and it set her on a course that was catastrophic to many people. Chapter 2: The Deaths. It's now 1969, and Velma and Thomas's marriage is falling apart. Velma's addiction to prescription drugs has led to some pretty noticeable behavior changes, and her husband Thomas's way of coping with that is to drink. So he's kind of turned into an alcoholic, kind of an addict himself. So Velma and Thomas are fighting a lot. And that takes us to April 4th, 1969. After a fight, Thomas Burke passes out at home drunk. So Velma takes the kids and leaves the house. When they returned home, they found that there was a fire. The house had burned down. Her husband, Thomas Burke, was inside when it happened, and her husband, Thomas Burke, was dead. Officially, it's ruled an accident. A man passed out drunk, smoking in bed, and started a fire. That's a pretty unusual thing to happen, right? Especially since we know that Velma is a serial killer. So knowing what we know now, I'm sure many people are giving this story the side eye. But Velma was never charged with his death, and she never confessed to it. But after she was arrested years later, investigators look back at the fire, and the timing was, like I said, interesting. Many accounts treat this as her first kill, but the record doesn't confirm it. So I just want to acknowledge everybody's suspicions here. Having said that, it's now 1970, and Velma marries again. Only within a year of her first husband's death. His name is Jennings Barfield. He's a widower. Unfortunately, only a year later, her second husband dies of heart complications. So, just to recap that's 2 husbands dead in 2 years. No autopsy on either, and no one looked twice. This is 1971, rural North Carolina, and a working-class widow with 2 husbands in the ground usually got a casserole and not an investigation. But it does seem like wherever Velma goes, a dark cloud seems to follow, because people who are close to her seem to be getting sick. Because in 1974, her own mother, Lillian, started getting violently sick. There was vomiting, diarrhea, nausea, but then she recovered. Then, a short time later, she actually dies, while Velma was her caretaker. Officially, the death was attributed to natural causes. So just to take a beat, Velma's mother is now dead. Her 2 husbands are dead. It's now the late 1970s, and Velma starts working as a private in-home caretaker for elderly people. She reads to them, she brings them meals, she manages their medication. Then a woman named Dolly Edwards dies in her care, suddenly. Then another man named John Henry Lee dies suddenly. There are a few things that these 2 had in common. They both had Velma working as their caretaker, and Velma had been forging checks on their account because she was stealing from them to fuel her addiction to prescription drugs. It's now 1977, and Velma starts dating a man named Roland Stewart Taylor. He's a tobacco farmer, a widower, and interestingly, he was actually related to Dolly Edwards, the elderly woman who had died under Velma's care. So here is when things start going sideways for Velma. Her 3rd husband notices that Velma has been forging checks on his account, and he confronts her about it. She needs access to this money, and she doesn't want her new husband to leave her or to get her in trouble. So what does she do? She decided to put arsenic-based rat poison in his beer and his iced tea. He gets violently sick, and Velma volunteers to nurse him. She takes him to the hospital herself, but unfortunately, he dies a few days later. However, this time an autopsy is performed, and the arsenic shows up. Why it took 5 bodies for someone to order a toxicology screen, we'll never know, but it turns out that Velma's own sister was the one who tipped the police that they should do an autopsy. Chapter 3. Why did Velma do this? So this is a part that I think is really significant to this case. So let me lay out the 3 explanations that were on the table, and you can decide which one or which combination you buy. Explanation number 1 is that Velma is a sociopath. The psychiatrist who examined her for the court found 3 disorders. The first was prescription drug abuse, another one was depression, and the one that's most notable is he said that she had an underlying personality disorder, which allowed her to put poison in a person's food or beverage without feeling any appreciation for the consequences of what she was doing. That's basically the closest thing to a clinical sociopathy finding you can get. And it's not from a journalist, that's from a doctor the court paid to evaluate her. So, explanation number 2, which I think is incredibly relevant. Velma was addicted to prescription pills. People don't realize how addicted she was. And every single one of her victims, the one thing they had in common was that she was stealing money from them by forging checks. So explanation number 2 is that Velma was an addict and would do anything for her next fix. So Velma's own defense, she said she never intended to kill anyone. She said she only meant to make them sick or slow them down so that she could buy time to repay the money she'd stolen. Now, that could be the case. Arsenic is poisonous, but in small, repeated doses, it does cause that kind of slow gastrointestinal decline that mimics natural illness. You could argue that she was just trying to make people sick and not kill them. But the problem with that defense is that people did keep dying. If you poison one person and they die, maybe you could write that off as a miscalculation. But this is 5 people within a decade who have passed away. So that either means you're the worst chemist alive, or that dosing was the point. Explanation number 3 was that Velma's traumatic childhood caused all of this. So a second psychiatrist at the trial gave this opinion. Her name was Dr. Dorothy Otno-Lewis. Now, she's very well respected. She's affiliated with NYU, and she specialized in the psychiatric examination of violent offenders. And she diagnosed Velma with dissociative identity disorder. A lot of people know that as multiple personality disorder, and the doctor testified that severe, repeated childhood sexual abuse had fractured Velma's identity, and that an alternate personality, a male alter named Billy, had emerged as a protector, and that Billy, not Velma, was the one who committed the murders. I want to be honest, dissociative identity disorder, or DID, is a very real disorder. It's also very controversial. DID, or multiple personalities, has a history of being overdiagnosed or misdiagnosed in forensic psychology. And a defense psychiatrist hired by Velma's lawyers obviously has ulterior motives or incentives to diagnose someone with this. But this woman was not a hack, and she built her career on this kind of work. So we have severe addiction issues, we have traumatic childhood issues, and we have serious mental health conditions. So here's the thing. You can hold all of these at the same time, and the case actually makes more sense when you do. A girl gets abused as a child by the people supposed to protect her. That traumatizes her, so she marries young to escape. And then the medical system hands her addictive drugs. The addiction breaks her further. And then the fraud starts, and someone gets close and she poisons them. Then it happens again and again, and the absence of consequences for Velma while she was doing this, the fact that no one was even looking, calcified whatever empathy she had left. By the time anyone notices, the person sitting in that courtroom isn't the same person who took that first pill in 1969. The pathway from here to there is pretty well documented, and I think most people can understand how someone could get there. But it certainly doesn't excuse taking anyone's life. It doesn't excuse the harm that Velma caused. Velma was a very different person by the time she was at trial and displayed bizarre behavior. At her trial, after the DA gave a closing argument asking the jury to put her to death, Velma reportedly gave him a round of applause, sat there and clapped for the other lawyer telling the jury to sentence her to death. I don't know what to make of that behavior, but do with it what you will. Chapter 4, The End. Velma spends 6 years on death row. She also goes through a metamorphosis. Like many people on death row do, Velma becomes born again. She is now a born-again Christian, and she's ministering to other inmates. By multiple accounts, the conversion appeared genuine. Even many evangelical organizations get involved in advocating for her death penalty to be overturned. They argued that she could be doing more good alive by spreading the gospel than putting her to death. Obviously, a death row conversation is a hot button issue because it brings so many questions of justice and ethics and morals onto the table. And this is definitely one of those cases that brought the death row conversation to the forefront of people's focus. Velma's last shot was clemency by the only person that could grant it, which was the governor of North Carolina, who at the time was Jim Hunt. In 1984, Jim Hunt was in the middle of a very expensive Senate race. He was running against Jesse Helms, and the entire country was watching. Jim Hunt's opponent was hammering that he was too liberal, and Jim Hunt was in a precarious position. Here he is being called a bleeding heart liberal in a southern state with a grandmother on death row asking for mercy 4 days before his election. It's kind of a pickle to be in. So what did Jim Hunt do? Jim Hunt decided to be tough on crime. He said she literally tortured to death her victims and should pay the maximum penalty. So it was death for Velma Barfield. Jim Hunt did wind up losing the election, just putting that out there. On November 2nd of 1984, Velma Barfield becomes the first woman executed in the United States since 1962, and the first ever by lethal injection. She instructed her attorneys to drop her final appeal the day before. She said she wanted to die with dignity, and her last meal was a bag of cheese doodles and a Coke. So who do you think Velma Barfield is? Was she a wounded child hurt before she had language for it? Was she an addict the medical system made and then abandoned? Was she a hardened sociopath? I mean, the honest answer is kind of all of the above. Because here's the fact that remains. Velma Barfield's victims are real. 4 people, including her own mother, partners that trusted her, died slowly and painfully because she was stealing from them to fuel her addiction. That doesn't get to be erased because of the harm that was inflicted upon Velma. It's a classic case of the victim becoming the victimizer. This is a case that reminds us that the line between monster and the person the system kept failing is thinner than we want to admit. And serial killer stories work as a genre because we get to call someone a monster and walk away. It's cleaner that way. But the story of Velma Barfield doesn't really let you do that. Kind of makes you sit in the gray, which is why, maybe, most people haven't heard of her. And that's exactly why I think you should. And that's our episode for today. Thank you so much for being here. The fact that you've made it this far means so much, and I appreciate it more than you know. 2 quick things before you go. First, if this is the kind of story you want more of, the single best thing you can do is hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. It's the best way to support the Ray Review channel for free. It tells the algorithm to put these episodes in front of more people, and that's the whole game, unfortunately. And second, I put together a list of true crime documentaries that I actually think do great work. They don't exploit, and they take victims seriously. They tell the truth, and it's the list that I wish someone would have given me when I first got into true crime documentaries. It's totally free. The link is in the description, and I'd love to know which ones you've seen and which ones you need to watch. Thank you so much for sitting in the gray areas with me and for letting me guide you through this story. I will see you next week in the next episode. Until then, stay safe and stay curious.